The message from my daughter-in-law arrived like a slap to the face. Her words glowing coldly on my phone screen. Lucille, we've decided to keep Mother's Day intimate this year, just immediate family. Hope you understand. I read it 3 times, my heart sinking with each pass. Immediate family. After 5 years of marriage to my son, Valerie still didn't consider his own mother to be immediate family. The realization stung worse than I could have imagined. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by freshly cut tulips from my garden, their vibrant colors suddenly seeming to mock my pain. For 3 years, I'd been helping Valerie and my son Nate with their mortgage payments, $600 each month, that stretched my retirement savings dangerously thin. Money I'd gladly given to help them establish themselves, to give Nate the foundation I'd always dreamed of providing as a single mother who'd struggled most of her life. My phone rang. It was Nate. I steadied myself before answering. "Mom," he started, his voice strained in that way it always was when Valerie was nearby. "Did you get Val's message?" "Yes," I replied, working to keep my voice even. "I'm just wondering what immediate family means if not your mother." There was a pause. I could hear him cover the phone, murmuring to someone, "Valerie, undoubtedly." When he returned, his voice was firmer. "Valerie's parents are coming over. We thought it would be nice to have just the 4 of us this year." The betrayal cut deep. "I see, and I'm not considered immediate family, but her parents are." "Mom, don't make this difficult." Nate sighed. "Valerie thinks we think it would be better this way. You and Val have been tense lately." Tense. What a convenient way to describe how my daughter-in-law rolled her eyes whenever I spoke, how she accidentally left me off family group messages, how she'd made not-so-subtle comments about my clothes, my opinions, even the way I arranged flowers, something I'd loved doing for over 40 years. "Will you still need the mortgage check this month?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Of course," Nate responded quickly. "Why wouldn't we?" I closed my eyes, feeling something finally break inside me. "Just checking. I'll mail it tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the check I'd already written. 3 years of checks. 3 years of invitations to Sunday dinners they rarely attended. 3 years of birthday and Christmas gifts acknowledged with hurried thank you texts. 3 years of watching Valerie slowly erase me from my son's life while happily cashing my checks. That evening, I received another text from Valerie. "Just so you know, we're having a proper Mother's Day celebration with my mom. I hope you're not too upset about our decision. It's just that Nate and I feel more comfortable this way. You can sometimes be a bit overwhelming." Overwhelming. The word echoed in my mind as tears burned my eyes. Was it overwhelming to love your child, to want to be part of their life, to hope for a place at their table on the one day meant to honor mothers? I picked up the mortgage check again, running my finger along the edge. Then, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, I tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths. I dropped the pieces into my shredder and watched them disappear. My hands shook, but not from sadness, from resolve. If I wasn't family enough to be included on Mother's Day, then perhaps I wasn't family enough to pay their mortgage. The next morning, I called the bank and canceled the automatic payment I had scheduled. The customer service representative asked if there was a problem. "No," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "I've just realized it's time for some changes." When I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and liberation. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. The weight of constantly trying to earn Valerie's approval, of pretending her subtle cruelties didn't hurt. Suddenly lifted from my shoulders, I knew there would be consequences. Nate would be furious. Valerie would have another reason to paint me as the difficult mother-in-law. But as I looked at the empty space where the check had been, I realized I couldn't continue financing my own exclusion. 3 days later, on Mother's Day, I turned off my phone and spent the day planting new flowers in my garden. With each seed I tucked into the soil, I made a promise to myself: no more shrinking, no more apologizing for existing, no more financing people who didn't value me. Little did I know that by sundown, my peaceful act of self-respect would unleash a storm that would change our family forever. Looking back, I suppose the pattern began shortly after Nate and Valerie's wedding. I'd given them a generous gift, $5,000 toward their honeymoon in Hawaii. I'd saved that money over 2 years, tucking away small amounts from my nursing salary each month. It was worth every penny to see the photos of Nate snorkeling in crystal clear waters, his face radiant with joy. Back then, they sent daily updates and called me twice during their trip to thank me. 3 months after they returned, Valerie called me directly, a rare occurrence. Her voice was honey sweet, almost rehearsed. "Lucille," she said, "I hate to ask this, but we're struggling with our mortgage. The interest rate is higher than we expected, and Nate's hoping for a promotion next quarter. But until then," she paused dramatically, "we were wondering if you might be able to help, just temporarily." I didn't hesitate. "Of course, how much do you need?" $600 a month would make all the difference," she replied, relief evident in her voice. "Just for 6 months or so, until Nate's promotion comes through." 6 months. That seemed reasonable, and I had some savings beyond my retirement fund. Nate was my only child, the center of my world since his father walked out when he was just 3 years old. I'd work double shifts, weekends, holidays, whatever it took to give him a good life. This was just an extension of that love. "I'll set up an automatic transfer," I told her, "first of each month. And Valerie, tell Nate not to worry. That's what family is for." The first 6 months passed quickly. No mention of ending the payments came, but I didn't bring it up. Then came the water heater, a $1 and $200 emergency that they just couldn't handle right now. Then their property taxes were unexpectedly high, requiring another $700. Their car insurance lapsed because they forgot to budget for it, $200 more. Each request came with profuse thanks and promises to pay me back someday. Promises that faded faster than morning dew in July. Meanwhile, my retirement account had stalled. At 62, financial advisors said I should have at least $500,000 saved. I had less than half that. The thought of working into my 70s began to haunt my nights, along with worries about potential health problems. What if I needed long-term care? What if my modest ranch house needed major repairs? Nearly 3 years had passed since that first request. I developed a ritual of sorts, tracking my contributions in a small leather-bound ledger, tallying the amounts, watching the total climb past $30,000, then $40,000, then $50,000. More than a third of my life savings had gradually migrated to Nate and Valerie's bank account. I might have continued indefinitely if not for social media. One evening after a double shift at the hospital, my feet throbbing in my practical white shoes, I opened Facebook to see a photo of Valerie modeling a pair of Louboutin shoes. "Sometimes a girl just needs to treat herself, blessed #retail therapy," her caption read. The red soles gleamed in the light, probably worth at least 3 of my monthly mortgage contributions. The next day brought an Instagram post of them at a vineyard in Napa, raising crystal glasses of Cabernet in the golden California sunshine. Weekend getaway with my love, #living or best life, Nate had written. I remembered him texting me just 2 days earlier saying they couldn't make our planned dinner because they were really tightening the budget this month. And that evening, I pulled out my bank statements and credit card bills. I'd been cutting corners for years shopping at discount grocery stores, turning the thermostat down to 65 degrees in winter, driving my 15-year-old Toyota long past when it should have been replaced. I'd foregone vacations, new clothes, even the book club retreat I'd longed to attend, all to ensure I could keep supporting them. Then came the calls from my financial advisor, Jack, increasingly concerned about my retirement planning. "Lucille," he'd said during our last meeting, his brow furrowed as he reviewed my accounts, "you're making regular large withdrawals from your savings. At this rate, you'll deplete your emergency fund within 2 years. Is everything okay?" I'd murmured something about helping my son temporarily. Jack's expression had shifted from concern to alarm. "This isn't temporary support anymore," that he'd pointed out gently. "This is a fundamental redistribution of your retirement security to your adult son and his wife. You need to ask yourself if they'd do the same for you." Would they? The question haunted me. If I needed help with medical bills or home repairs, would they step up? Given how rarely they made time to see me these days, despite living just 20 minutes away, I had my doubts. The final straw came in the form of an overheard conversation. I'd stopped by their house unexpectedly one Sunday afternoon, bringing a homemade lasagna. I heard their voices through the open window as I approached the front door. "Your mom called again about Sunday dinner," Valerie was saying, her tone dismissive. "I know," Nate replied with a sigh. "I'll make some excuse. Just tell her we're busy. It's not like she'll cut us off. She loves playing the generous mother too much." Valerie laughed. "As long as the checks keep coming, we can put up with a dinner every few months." I froze on their front porch, lasagna growing cold in my hands. In that moment, something crystallized within me, the understanding that I wasn't supporting my son through a temporary rough patch. I was funding a lifestyle beyond my means for 2 adults who viewed me not as family, but as a reliable source of income. I set the lasagna down by their door, walked back to my car, and drove home in silence. That night, I opened my checkbook and stared at the next mortgage check I'd written for them. The numbers swam before my eyes as the full weight of my situation settled over me. $50,000 gone. My retirement compromised. All while being systematically excluded from their lives. The following morning, I called my bank and canceled the automatic payment. The first call came at 7:15 Monday morning, exactly 3 days after I'd canceled the automatic payment. I was on my porch swing, enjoying the quiet neighborhood before the day began in earnest. The coffee in my favorite blue mug was still hot, steam rising in delicate spirals as cardinals flitted around my bird feeder. This small morning ritual had become my sanctuary, a moment of peace before facing whatever the day might bring. When Nate's name flashed across my phone screen, my hand trembled slightly. I let it ring. 10 minutes later, he called again. By the third call, I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable confrontation any longer. "Hello, Nate," I answered, working to keep my voice neutral. "Mom, what the hell?" His voice was strained, anger barely contained. "The bank called. They said our mortgage payment bounced. Did you cancel your check?" I took a slow sip of coffee before responding. "Yes, I did." Why would you?" He stopped abruptly, And I heard muffled voices, Valerie, in the background. No doubt. When he returned, his tone had hardened. Is this because of Mother's Day? Are you seriously that petty? The accusation stung, but I held firm. This isn't about pettiness. Nate, this is about respect. I watched a hummingbird hover near my feeder, its wings a blur of motion. For 3 years, I've helped you with your mortgage. I've given you over $50,000 while Valerie has systematically pushed me out of your lives. That's not fair, he shot back. Valerie hasn't... Nate, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. Your wife told me I wasn't welcome on Mother's Day because I'm overwhelming. She invited her parents instead. If I'm not family enough to celebrate Mother's Day with you, then perhaps I'm not family enough to pay your mortgage. Silence hung between us for a moment before he spoke again, his voice lower. This is really disappointing. Mom, I never thought you'd use money to manipulate us. His words hit like a physical blow. Manipulate, is that what you think I've been doing all these years, supporting you? I gripped the porch railing, steadying myself against the pain of his accusation. I've never asked for anything in return except basic respect and inclusion in your lives. Valerie thinks. I don't care what Valerie thinks anymore, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I care what you think, Nate. What do you think about excluding your mother from Mother's Day? Another pause. I think you're overreacting. It was just one day. It's not just one day, I said, my voice breaking slightly. It's a pattern, and I'm done financing my own exclusion. I ended the call before he could respond, my hands trembling as I set down the phone. By noon, the text messages started rolling in. Valerie real mature. Lucille. Valerie. Using money as a weapon just proves why we wanted space from you. Valerie Nate is devastated by your behavior. Is this really the kind of mother you want to be? Nate, Mom, please call me back. We need to fix this. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I busied myself with gardening, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of digging and planting, but the peace I sought eluded me. Each time I pushed my trowel into the soil, I thought of the roots I'd tried to establish in my son's life roots that Valerie seemed determined to sever. Around 3 p.m., my doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole to see Nate and Valerie standing on my porch, both looking thunderous. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. We need to talk, Nate said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. Valerie followed, her eyes scanning my living room with thinly veiled disdain. Yes, we do, I agreed, closing the door and turning to face them. Would you like some tea? We don't want tea, Valerie snapped. We want an explanation and for you to fix this mess you've created. I looked at my son, searching his face for any sign of the boy I'd raised, the one who once brought me dandelions and called them flowers, who held my hand at his father's funeral and promised we'd always take care of each other. All I saw was a man who couldn't meet my eyes. I've already explained, I said calmly. I won't continue to financially support people who don't respect me. This isn't about respect. Valerie's voice rose. This is about you trying to control us. You've always wanted to control Nate, and you can't stand that he has me now. That's not true, Bessie, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger bubbling inside me. I've never tried to control either of you. I've only wanted to be treated with basic courtesy and inclusion. Key. You call barging into our lives and criticizing everything I do basic courtesy. Valerie shot back. I blinked, genuinely confused. When have I ever criticized you? Valerie, you do it all the time. The way you look at our house, how you ask about our finances, your comments about my cooking. I've never said a negative word about your cooking, I protested. You don't have to say it. It's your expression, the way you pick at your food. I turned to Nate, desperate for him to see reason. Nate, you know that's not true. He shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you can be critical sometimes. Maybe not directly, but... His words trailed off, and I felt a chill settle over me. This was what Valerie had done. Twisted my actions, reframed my words until even my own son saw me as the villain in their story. I think you should both leave, I said quietly. Not until you agree to reinstate the mortgage payment, Valerie demanded. I looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly saw everything clearly. The subtle manipulation, the way she'd positioned herself between Nate and me, the calculated effort to isolate him from his family. No, I said, the word carrying the weight of years of silent acquiescence. The answer is no. You'll regret this, Valerie hissed, grabbing her purse. Come on, Nate. She's made her choice. Nate hesitated, looking torn. Mom, please, we can work this out. Yes, we can. I agreed. But not like this, not with threats and accusations. Fine, he said finally, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Have it your way. As they left, slamming the door behind them, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange, calm certainty settling over me. The worst had happened. My son had chosen his wife over me, and I had survived. What I didn't know then was that the real battle was just beginning. That evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. My sister had tagged me in a Facebook post. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find Valerie's lengthy message detailing how I had abandoned my son in his time of need, how I was using money to control him, how I had always been jealous of their relationship. The family war had gone public. By the end of the week, I had 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, and countless social media notifications. Valerie's post had spread through our extended family like wildfire, with people taking sides without even hearing my version of events. I turned off my notifications, unable to bear the constant judgment. My sister Joanne was the only one who called to hear my side. This doesn't sound like you, Lucy, she'd said, her voice concerned but not accusatory. What really happened? After I explained everything, the Mother's Day exclusion, the years of financial support, the pattern of gradual isolation, Joanne sighed deeply. I always thought there was something off about Valerie, too perfect, too polished. I just don't understand how Nate can't see it. I don't either, I said, my voice breaking. He's always been such a good judge of character. Love blinds people, Joanne replied, and manipulators like Valerie are experts at isolation. It's textbook. Her words stayed with me as I tried to go about my days. Textbook manipulation. Was that what I'd been experiencing all these years on Saturday morning, a week after the confrontation? My doorbell rang unexpectedly. I approached cautiously, half expecting to find Nate and Valerie ready for round two. Instead, through the peephole, I saw a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Can I help you?" I asked through the door. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Heather, Valerie's sister. Could I speak with you for a moment?" I hesitated, my hand on the lock. Valerie had a sister. In the 5 years she'd been married to my son, she'd rarely mentioned her family except in comparison to mine, her parents' lavish Christmas celebrations versus my humble traditions, Her mother's gourmet cooking versus my comfort food. Curiosity won out. I opened the door. "Heather," I said cautiously. "How did you find my address?" "From Nate's old contact list," she replied, her eyes darting nervously to the street behind her. "Look, I don't have much time, but I saw Valerie's Facebook post, and I couldn't stay silent." Something in her voice, a tremor of fear, perhaps made me pay attention. I invited her in, offered her tea, which she accepted with a grateful smile. We sat in my living room, the late morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "I should tell you," she began, turning the teacup in her hands. "Valerie and I aren't close, haven't been for years. She's difficult to have a relationship with." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "The thing is," Heather continued, leaning forward, "Valerie's done this before, with our stepfather." "Done what exactly?" "Manipulated our mother into thinking he was controlling and negative, always criticizing. Mom eventually asked him to move out. It tore our family apart." And she paused, taking a sip of tea. "He was a good man, kind, generous. But Valerie couldn't stand not being the center of attention." I sank deeper into my armchair, my heart pounding. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen how she isolates people, twists their words, creates false narratives, and then she uses them financially, emotionally, however she can until they're not useful anymore." So my mind raced back to all the subtle comments, the way Valerie would rephrase my words when telling Nate, making innocent questions sound like criticism. "There's more," Heather continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Check Nate's email if you can. 3 months ago, Valerie was supposedly planning a surprise anniversary party for you both. Nate asked me to help, but then suddenly it was canceled, and Valerie told everyone you had declined the invitation, saying you were too busy." And my throat tightened. "I never received an invitation." "I know, because there never was one. Valerie made it up, told Nate she'd called you, that you weren't interested in celebrating with them." Tears burned my eyes as pieces started falling into place. Forgotten invitations, misunderstood conversations, times when Nate seemed hurt by something I supposedly said or did. "Why would she do this?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Control," Heather said simply. "And your money? Nate mentioned once that you helped them with the mortgage. Is that true?" I nodded. "For 3 years now." "That explains a lot. Valerie's always looking for financial support. She did the same with our stepfather, asked for money constantly, then turned around and told our mother he was trying to control her through his handouts." We talked for another 20 minutes, Heather filling in gaps in the narrative I'd been trying to piece together. She described a pattern stretching back to Valerie's teenage years, creating rifts between family members, positioning herself as a victim, isolating people who questioned her narratives. When Heather finally left, promising to stay in touch, I sat among the scattered evidence of years of manipulation, my mind reeling. I hadn't canceled that check out of pettiness or revenge. Some part of me had sensed what was happening all along, had finally reached its breaking point. My phone buzzed with a text from Nate. "Mom, we need to talk. Just you and me, please." I stared at the message, feeling both hope and dread. Was he finally seeing the truth? Or was this another trap orchestrated by Valerie? Either way, I couldn't ignore it. This was my son, the little boy I'd raised alone, the young man who'd once looked at me with nothing but love and respect in his eyes. Tomorrow, I typed back, "My house, 2 p.m. As I sent the message, I began gathering the evidence I'd collected, along with the new insights from Heather. Tomorrow, Nate would hear the truth, whether he was ready for it or not. I slept fitfully that night, my dreams filled with distorted images of Nate as a child, calling for me but unable to find me, while Valerie stood between us, her smile growing wider and wider until it consumed her face entirely. When I woke the next morning, I knew this conversation with my son would either begin to heal our relationship or sever it completely. There would be no middle ground, no comfortable compromise. The truth, as they say, would set us free or tear us apart forever. At exactly 2:03 p.m., Nate's car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window as he sat there for a moment, his forehead resting against the steering wheel. When he finally emerged, his shoulders were hunched, his movements hesitant, so unlike the confident young man I'd raised. I opened the door before he could knock. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Nate paused at the threshold, eyes scanning the living room where I'd arranged the evidence of Valerie's manipulation. Photos, financial records, text messages printed out and organized chronologically. Heather had sent additional documentation, overnight emails between her and Valerie, that revealed even more of my daughter-in-law's calculated behavior. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The truth," I replied. "Please sit down." He lowered himself onto the couch, looking lost in the home where he'd grown up. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the rumpled shirt signs that he wasn't sleeping well. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, falling back on hospitality to ease the tension. He shook his head. "Mom, I need to understand why you canceled the mortgage payment. We're struggling. The bank is threatening foreclosure." "Are you really struggling, Nate?" I interrupted, my voice gentle but firm. I handed him a folder containing their social media posts from the last 3 months. "Because according to Valerie's Instagram, you just took a weekend trip to Napa. You bought new living room furniture. Valerie has 3 new designer handbags." He flipped through the printouts, his brow furrowing. "Those were special occasions. The trip was a work thing. The furniture was on sale. And these," I handed him my financial records. 3 years of mortgage payments, home repairs, property taxes, car insurance, all while they were supposedly struggling. Nate set the papers down, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think. We had a plan to pay you back eventually." "This isn't about paying me back," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "It's about respect, Nate. It's about being treated like family, not an ATM machine." His eyes flashed with anger. "That's not fair. We've always appreciated." "Have you?" I asked quietly, because from where I'm sitting, appreciation looks a lot different than being excluded from Mother's Day while my money is still welcome. He fell silent, unable to meet my eyes. "Nate," I continued, my voice softening, "I received a visit from Heather yesterday." His head snapped up, surprise evident on his face. "Valerie's sister. Why would she visit you?" "Because she's seen this pattern before, with their stepfather." I recounted my conversation with Heather, watching as Nate's expression shifted from disbelief to confusion to dawning realization. When I told him about the anniversary party that never existed, he paled visibly. "That can't be right," he muttered. "Valerie told me she called you. She said you were too busy, that you had a spa day planned with Joanne." "I never received that call, Nate, and I haven't been to a spa in years." He stood abruptly, pacing the living room, stopping occasionally to examine a piece of evidence, the timeline of canceled plans, the record of financial support, the text messages between Valerie and her friends, where she referred to me as the cash cow. I don't understand, he said finally, his voice breaking. Why would she do this? People who manipulate others do it for control. I explained gently, and sometimes for financial gain. Nate sank back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I've been such a fool. My heart ached for him, despite everything. He was still my son, and seeing him in pain was almost unbearable. I sat beside him, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder. You're not a fool, Nate. Manipulative people are incredibly skilled at what they do. They isolate their targets, rewrite narratives, create division. It's not your fault. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. But I believed her over my own mother. How can you ever forgive me for that? I squeezed his shoulder. There's nothing to forgive. You loved her. You trusted her. That's what good people do. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of revelation hanging heavy between us. Finally, Nate spoke again, his voice steadier. What happens now? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. What did happen now? Could our relationship be repaired? Could Nate see his way out of Valerie's manipulation? That depends on you, I said carefully. I can't tell you what to do about your marriage. That's your decision. But I can tell you that I'm setting boundaries from now on. I won't be financing your lifestyle anymore. Not because I don't love you, but because it's not healthy for either of us. He nodded slowly. I understand, and I wouldn't ask that of you again. He paused, swallowing hard. I need to talk to Valerie, confront her with what I know. A flash of fear went through me. Be careful, Nate. When manipulators are exposed, they often become volatile. What choice do I have? He asked, his eyes meeting mine. I can't continue living a lie. Before Nate could respond, his phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. It's Valerie. She's been tracking my location through my phone. She wants to know why I'm here. What will you tell her? I asked, suddenly nervous about what would follow. Nate stood, a new resolve in his posture. The truth, that I'm talking to my mother, that I've seen the evidence of her manipulation, that things are going to change. His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Then again, and again. She's calling now, he said, showing me the screen. I should take this outside. I nodded, watching as he stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. Through the window, I could see his back straighten as he answered. I could see his free hand gesturing emphatically as he spoke. After a few minutes, he ended the call and stood motionless, staring out at the street. When he came back inside, his face was pale but determined. She's coming over, he said. She says there's been a misunderstanding, that she can explain everything. My stomach twisted with anxiety. Do you want me to be here for that conversation? Nate took a deep breath, then nodded. Yes, it's time we all face the truth together. As we waited for Valerie to arrive, I prepared myself for the confrontation ahead. I wasn't naive enough to think this would end neatly or painlessly, but for the first time in years, I felt like my son and I were standing on the same side. The sound of squealing tires announced Valerie's arrival before we saw her car. She burst through my front door without knocking, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, her eyes wild with anger. She froze when she saw the evidence spread across my living room, the financial records, the timeline of her manipulations, the screenshots of her social media posts. What is this? She demanded, her voice shrill, Her gaze darted between Nate and me. "What have you been telling him?" Nate stood, his posture rigid. "The truth, Valerie. Or at least what we've been able to piece together." "The truth." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean her warped version of events, Nate? You know how your mother twists things?" I remained seated, watching as she employed the tactics Heather had described: deflection, projection, gaslighting. "I talked to your sister," Nate said quietly. Valerie's expression flickered, surprise, then fury. "Heather, that backstabbing little—" She stopped herself, composing her features into a mask of hurt. "Heather has always been jealous of me. Whatever she said is a lie." "Is this a lie?" Nate asked, holding up a printout of text messages between Valerie and her friend. Messages where she referred to me as the cash cow and boasted about how she'd trained Nate to choose her over his mother. Valerie's face paled. "Where did you get those?" "Heather sent them to my mother. Apparently, you two share an iCloud account. She's seen everything." "Valerie." For a moment, Valerie seemed at a loss for words. Then her expression hardened. "So what? So I vented to my friends. Everyone does that." "Vented?" Nate repeated incredulously. "You literally wrote, and I quote, 'Lucy's so desperate to be part of our lives. We'll keep taking the mortgage money as long as we pretend to care about her. Once the house is paid off, we can cut her off completely." Valerie's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You had no right to go through my private messages. And you had no right to manipulate my relationship with my mother," Nate shot back, his voice rising. "You had no right to lie about calls and invitations, to twist her words, to use her financially while systematically pushing her out of our lives." Valerie's demeanor suddenly shifted. Tears welled in her eyes and her shoulders slumped. "I was just trying to protect our marriage," she whispered. "Your mother has always hated me, always tried to come between us." I finally spoke up, my voice calm. "That's not true. Valerie, I welcomed you into our family. I supported you both financially and emotionally. All I ever wanted was to be included in your lives." She rounded on me, the vulnerable act vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "You think your money gives you the right to control us, to dictate how we live." "My mother never tried to control us," Nate interjected. "She was helping us at our request. Help we apparently didn't even need, given how we've been spending money." "She canceled the mortgage payment," Valerie snapped. "If that's not control, what is? It's a boundary." I said simply, "One I should have said a long time ago." Valerie's face contorted with rage. "You've turned him against me," she hissed. "You and Heather and your lies." "No one needed to turn me against you," Nate said wearily. "You did that yourself with every manipulation, every lie. Every time you tried to erase my mother from our lives, while still taking her money." Valerie's gaze darted around the room like a cornered animal looking for escape. "This is ridiculous. I'm leaving." She turned to Nate. "Are you coming?" The question hung in the air between them, a simple query that carried the weight of their entire marriage. Nate took a deep breath. "No, Valerie, I'm not." The three words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Valerie's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're choosing her over me after everything we've built together." "I'm choosing the truth," Nate replied, his voice steady for the first time since arriving. "And the truth is, our marriage was built on lies. Your lies." Valerie took a step back, as if physically struck by his words. Then her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "Fine," as she spat. "Stay with Mommy. But don't think this is over." She pointed a manicured finger at me. And you'll regret this." And with that, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled. The sound of her car starting and speeding away broke the heavy silence she left behind. Nate collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I can't believe I didn't see it," he murmured. "All this time, right in front of me." I sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his back. "Don't blame yourself. She's very good at what she does." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "What happens now?" It was a complicated question, with no easy answer. "That's up to you," I said carefully. "But whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm here for you, even after everything, after I believed her over you, after I let her push you away. You're my son," I said simply. "That hasn't changed." 2 days after our confrontation with Valerie, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. Inside was a formal letter from Bradford and Associates, attorneys at law, printed on heavy cream stationery with an embossed letterhead that screamed, "Expensive." "Dear Mrs. Mitchell," it began. "This office represents Valerie Hamilton in regards to your intentional interference with her marital relationship and your malicious withdrawal of promised financial support. The letter went on for 3 pages, filled with legal jargon and thinly veiled threats. They claimed I had committed intentional infliction of emotional distress and tortious interference with contractual relations. They demanded I cease all defamatory communications and reinstate the mortgage payments immediately, or face legal action seeking compensatory and punitive damages. My hands trembled slightly as I read, but not from fear, from indignation. After everything Valerie had done, she was now trying to intimidate me with legal threats. I called my friend Sharon, who had been my attorney since my divorce from Nate's father 25 years ago. "Don't worry," Sharon assured me after reviewing the letter. "This is mostly bluster. They're hoping you'll get scared and start writing checks again. There's no legal obligation for you to financially support your adult son and his wife." "What should I do?" I asked. "Forward me the letter. I'll respond with a firmly worded letter of my own. In the meantime, document everything. Every text, every email, every social media post." A week after Nate filed for separation, Valerie took her campaign public. I was having lunch with Joanne when my phone began buzzing continuously with notifications. Joanne's phone chimed seconds later. "Oh my," she said, her eyes widening as she looked at her screen. "Lucy, you need to see this." Valerie had posted a lengthy message on Facebook, tagging mutual friends, family members, and even members of our church. In it, she portrayed herself as a devoted wife whose marriage was being destroyed by a controlling mother-in-law who had weaponized financial support to punish her for setting healthy boundaries. "After years of enduring criticism and passive-aggressive behavior," she wrote, "I finally stood up for myself and my husband by creating some space in our relationship with my mother-in-law. Her response was to vindictively cut off promised financial support, knowing we would struggle, and to poison my husband against me with lies and manipulations." The post continued with claims that I had always been jealous of their relationship, that I couldn't stand not being the center of Nate's attention, that I had systematically tried to undermine their marriage from the beginning. By that evening, my voicemail was full. Text messages flooded in from friends, family members, and acquaintances, some offering support, others expressing disappointment in my behavior. Several church members sent messages saying they were praying for me to find my way back to Christian values. "I never knew she could be so vindictive," Nate said when he saw the post and the resulting fallout. He had already lost 3 friends who believed Valerie's version of events and had publicly condemned him for abandoning his wife. When manipulators lose control, they often lash out. I explained, repeating something I'd read in a book about emotional abuse. They need to control the narrative, to make themselves the victim instead of the perpetrator. The next blow came when our pastor called, asking if Nate and I would take a step back from church activities until the situation was resolved. People were uncomfortable, he explained awkwardly. Perhaps we could attend the early service, which Valerie didn't typically attend. She's systematically trying to isolate us. Nate realized, just like she did with me before, but now she's doing it to both of us. By the end of the week, I had 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, and countless social media notifications. I'd turned off my phone for hours at a time, unable to bear the constant judgment from people who had only heard one side of a complex story. Should we respond publicly? Nate asked one evening to set the record straight. I shook my head. That's exactly what she wants, to drag us into a public mudslinging match. The truth will come out eventually. People who truly know us will wait to hear our side. I was right, though I didn't know just how soon vindication would come. 1 month after Nate filed for separation, his phone chimed with a text message from an unexpected source. "It's from Melissa," he said, surprise evident in his voice as he glanced at his screen. Melissa had been Valerie's closest friend for years, a fixture at their dinner parties and social gatherings. "What does she want?" I asked, trying to mask my suspicion. So many of Valerie's friends had joined her campaign against us that I'd grown wary of any contact from their social circle. "She wants to meet, says she has information I should know." Nate's brow furrowed as he read the message again. "She says she can't support what Valerie is doing anymore." The meeting was arranged for the following day at a coffee shop 2 towns over, far enough from our community that Melissa wouldn't likely be spotted by mutual acquaintances. Nate went alone, returning 2 hours later with a stunned expression and a USB drive. "You need to see this, Tay," he said, his voice hollow as he connected the drive to my laptop. The files contained months of private messages between Valerie and Melissa, along with screenshots of group chats with their wider friend circle. What I read made my blood run cold. "I've got Lucy wrapped around my finger," Valerie had written 3 years ago, shortly after asking for the first mortgage payment. "She's so desperate for Nate's attention that she'll pay for anything if it means she gets to play mommy once in a while." And another message from just 6 months ago. "The house will be paid off in 2 years. Then we can cut her off completely. She served her purpose." And most damning of all, a message from just days before the Mother's Day exclusion. "Operation Free Nate is in full swing. I've convinced him his mother is toxic. Once we're financially independent, I can finally get him away from her influence completely." The level of calculation was breathtaking. Messages spanning years revealed how systematically Valerie had worked to isolate Nate, to extract financial support from me, all while secretly despising us both. "Why is Melissa sharing this now?" I asked, still scrolling through the evidence of Valerie's duplicity. She said she's known something was off for a while, but the Facebook post was the last straw. Nate ran a hand through his hair, still struggling to process what he'd seen. Valerie's private comments to friends don't match her public victim narrative at all. Melissa said she couldn't be part of the lie anymore. The next day, Nate forwarded the evidence to his divorce attorney. Within hours, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. Valerie's demands for alimony and continued support from me became untenable in the face of such clear evidence of manipulation and misrepresentation. Her attorney, initially aggressive and dismissive of our claims, suddenly became eager to negotiate an equitable settlement. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided fairly. Valerie's claims to Nate's retirement accounts were withdrawn. The threatening letters to me abruptly ceased. More surprising still was the social shift. Melissa hadn't just shared the evidence with Nate, she had also reached out to key friends in their circle, privately showing them the truth behind Valerie's carefully crafted public image. "I don't expect everyone to suddenly take our side," Nate said pragmatically. "People have invested too much in believing her version of events, but at least some of them know the truth now." He was right. While some friends doubled down on their support for Valerie, others reached out with awkward apologies. Our pastor called, his tone markedly different from our previous conversation. "I've received some concerning information," he said carefully. "I think we may have been too hasty in our response to your family situation. Of course, you and Lucille are welcome at all church services and activities." The most satisfying moment came when Valerie was forced to take down her defamatory Facebook post after Sharon sent a cease and desist letter backed by the evidence we now possessed. The public story she'd worked so hard to construct began to unravel thread by thread. "I never expected vindication to come so quickly," I admitted to Nate one evening as we sat on my porch, "or so completely." "Me neither," he said, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "But I'm grateful it did. Living under those accusations, having people believe such awful things about us." He shook his head. "It was worse than I ever imagined." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "The truth has a way of finding its way to the surface eventually. I just didn't expect Melissa to be the one to bring it there." "The funny thing is," Nate said with a rueful smile, "Valerie always told me never to trust Melissa completely. Said she had loose lips." He laughed softly. "I guess she was right about that, at least. As difficult as the past months had been, there was something deeply healing about having the truth acknowledged, not just between Nate and me, but in the wider circle of people whose opinions had mattered to us. The tide had turned, and though the waters were still choppy, we could finally see the shore. 1 year later, I stood in my garden pruning roses as the morning sun warmed my shoulders. The past 12 months had been a journey of painful revelations, difficult adjustments, and ultimately, healing. The soil beneath my fingers felt cool and alive, much like the new relationship that had grown between Nate and me, rooted in truth and nurtured with honest communication. The sound of a car pulling into my driveway made me look up. Nate emerged, carrying a small gift bag and wearing a smile that reached his eyes, something I hadn't seen in years, not since Valerie had begun her campaign of isolation. "Happy Mother's Day, God," he said, embracing me tightly. "You remembered," I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. How could I forget? He handed me the gift bag with a shy smile. "I made reservations at Giovanni's for noon. I hope that works for you." I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion welling inside me. After everything we'd been through, these simple gestures, a hug, a dinner reservation, his presence on Mother's Day meant more than he could possibly know. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Valerie had fought it every step of the way, even after Melissa's revelations had exposed her manipulations. But with the weight of evidence against her, even her most determined efforts couldn't prevent the inevitable. The house had been sold, the proceeds split equitably, and her demands for ongoing support were dismissed by a judge who'd reviewed the text messages showing her true intentions. We sat on the porch swing, a tradition from his childhood when we'd share popsicles and stories on warm days. I have news, Nate said, a hint of nervous excitement in his voice. The divorce is final. I mean, you know that. But I just got confirmation that all the paperwork is complete. It's really over. And I squeezed his hand. How do you feel? He considered the question carefully, the way he'd learned to do in therapy. Relieved, sad that it came to this, but mostly free. Like I've been carrying this weight for so long, and suddenly it's gone. Nate had started therapy shortly after moving into my spare bedroom. Initially, it was to help him process the betrayal and manipulation he'd experienced. Over time, it had evolved into a deeper exploration of his own patterns and vulnerabilities. I have another piece of news, he continued, pulling me from my thoughts. I've put an offer on a house. It's small, just a 2-bedroom craftsman about 15 minutes from here. But it's mine. Well, mine and the bank's. He added with a self-deprecating laugh. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for him. Close enough for regular visits, but far enough for us both to have our independence. He nodded, appreciating that I understood. Over the past year, we'd both worked hard to rebuild our relationship on healthier foundations. I'd set clear boundaries about financial support, and he'd respected them, working extra hours at the architectural firm to save for his down payment instead of asking for my help. There's something I want you to know, Nate said, his expression growing serious. I've been thinking a lot about our relationship, not just what happened with Valerie, but before that, too. Dang. I tensed slightly, unsure where this was heading. Dr. Winters, my therapist, has helped me understand how I got caught in Valerie's manipulation, why I was vulnerable to it. He took a deep breath, and how my relationship with you played into it. I braced myself, wondering if somehow I'd contributed to his susceptibility to Valerie's machinations. Not in the way you might think, he clarified quickly, reading my expression. It's just, I always felt like I needed to be perfect for you, to make up for Dad leaving, to justify all your sacrifices. I grew up watching you work those double shifts at the hospital, seeing how tired you were, but still making time to help with my homework or come to my games. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I felt this enormous pressure, not from you, but from myself, to succeed, to make it all worth it. And Valerie sensed that insecurity and exploited it. She offered a world where I didn't have to earn love or approval, where I was perfect just as I was. I took a deep breath, feeling my own guilt surface. I never wanted you to feel that pressure. I know, Yael, he said gently, but I did. And that's not your fault. Dr. K. Winters says it's common for children of single parents, especially when the other parent abandoned them. We develop these beliefs that we need to be extraordinary to be worthy of the remaining parent's love and sacrifice. And his honesty both hurt and healed. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I've always been proud of you, Nate, not because of your achievements, but because of who you are. I know that now, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But it took a lot of therapy to really believe it. He looked out at the garden, where new growth was pushing through the soil. I'm learning that sometimes our perceptions are shaped by things beyond anyone's control. That doesn't make them true. We sat in contemplative silence for a moment, the swing creaking softly beneath us. A cardinal landed on my bird feeder, its bright red plumage a vivid splash of color against the greenery. The therapist thinks we're both making good progress, Nate continued, his tone lightening. especially since we're talking more openly now. We are, I agreed. The past year had taught us both to communicate more honestly, to express needs and concerns directly instead of assuming or suppressing them. Nate reached into the gift bag he'd brought and pulled out a small flat package wrapped in silver paper. "For you," he said. "Open it now." I carefully unwrapped it to find a framed photograph Nate and me at his college graduation, both beaming with pride and joy. It was the last photo taken of us before he met Valerie, the last uncomplicated moment of our relationship. "I found it when I was packing up the house," he explained. "Thought you might like to have it." And tears welled in my eyes as I traced the frame with my fingertips. "It's perfect," I managed. Later, as we drove to the restaurant, I reflected on how far we'd come. The painful exclusion from last year's Mother's Day had set in motion a chain of events that, while devastating at the time, had ultimately led to healing and truth. I'd heard through mutual friends that Valerie had moved to another state and was already engaged to a wealthy businessman twice her age. I felt no satisfaction in this news, only a quiet hope that her new fiancé might see through her manipulations before suffering the same fate as Nate. At the restaurant, Nate raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. "And to the truth," I added, clinking my glass against his, however painful it might be. And as we enjoyed our meal, sharing stories and plans for the future, I realized that what I'd initially seen as an ending that moment when I tore up the mortgage check and set a boundary had actually been a beginning. The beginning of reclaiming my voice, my financial independence, and most importantly, my relationship with my son. We'd both learned valuable lessons. Nate about recognizing manipulation and valuing genuine relationships. Me about setting healthy boundaries and understanding that true love doesn't require financial sacrifice or silent suffering. On the drive home, Nate asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Canceling that check. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most necessary. He nodded thoughtfully. "I think it saved us both." As the sun set behind us, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. We were no longer just mother and son bound by obligation and history, but two adults choosing to be in each other's lives, respecting each other's boundaries, and valuing each other's worth. I had been silenced, but never defeated. And in finding my voice again, I had helped my son find his as well. The check that I'd canceled a year ago had seemed at the time like a small act of rebellion. In retrospect, it was an act of self-respect that had rippled outward, eventually touching and transforming both our lives. On that Mother's Day, when I wasn't welcome at my son's table, I made a choice that felt terrifying, to value myself enough to set a boundary, even at the risk of losing my relationship with Nate. As I look back now, I realized that by tearing up that check, I didn't just save my retirement fund, I saved my dignity, my son, and ultimately our relationship. The path wasn't easy. We faced public humiliation, legal threats, and the pain of confronting difficult truths. But through it all, we emerged stronger and wiser. Nate and I were no longer just mother and son, bound by obligation and history, but two adults choosing to be in each other's lives, respecting each other's boundaries, and valuing each other's worth. We'd both learned valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation, setting healthy boundaries, and understanding that true love doesn't require financial sacrifice or silent suffering. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right choice. Sometimes loving someone means saying no. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give others is the example of loving ourselves enough to demand respect. Dear friends, my story isn't just about a mother-in-law conflict or financial manipulation. It's about something much deeper that touches all our lives, the courage to value ourselves. How many of us have silently accepted disrespect because we feared losing relationships? How many of us have financially or emotionally overextended ourselves, hoping that our sacrifice would somehow earn us love and inclusion? How many of us have confused generosity with self-erasure? True generosity comes from a place of strength, not desperation. True love flourishes with healthy boundaries, not despite them. And our worth is never determined by how much we give, but by the simple fact of our humanity. If my story resonates with you, perhaps it's time to examine your own relationships. Are you valued for who you are, or merely what you provide? Are your boundaries respected? Do you feel seen and heard? If not, perhaps it's time for your own small act of rebellion, your own moment of choosing self-respect over silent suffering. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love? What happened afterward? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found value in my journey, please consider subscribing to this channel. Together, we can build a community that supports healthy relationships built on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine love, because we all deserve nothing less. Remember, you can be silenced, but never defeated. And in finding your voice again, you may help others find theirs as well.